Let's have a look at question 40 in this video. So the 99% confidence interval for the difference in proportion of Canadians and Americans who believe that there's too much violence on TV is gonna be the following. Is this true or false? Now, before solving the question, what does this 99% confidence interval show us for the two proportions that have a sample size of 1500 observations? Let's write that down. Let's give the 99% confidence interval. That's gonna give us an interval of values that contains the true difference between the population proportions in 99% of random samples with the size of 1500 observations each. So in other words, what we're saying is that if we take 99 random samples out of 100, we are going to have the true population mean included in our confidence interval. So our confidence interval is going to include the true population mean for 99% of these random samples. Hope this makes sense. Now the analogy is very similar to the simple confidence interval that we used to do before, where we had a confidence interval for the sample mean. Now we have a confidence interval for a difference in proportions. So because the logic is the same, it's going to have a very similar formula in its structure. The confidence interval here is going to have the following shape. We're taking the difference in proportions based on our sample, the proportion of the Canadians minus the proportions of the Americans from the sample, plus minus a margin of error. And that margin of error is going to be the critical value z at the 99% confidence interval, which means a 1% significance level spread on two tails, because the confidence interval has two tails, multiplied with the square root of, so we're working out the standard deviation now, and that's going to be the proportion of the Canadians in the sample times 1 minus the proportion of the Canadians in the sample divided by the number of observations of Canadians, plus the same analogy for the Americans, proportions of the Americans in the sample minus 1 times 1 minus the proportion of Americans in the sample divided by the number of observations of Americans. So let's work out the math here. This is gonna be just a computation. So the confidence interval that we're looking for is equal to the difference between, now the proportion of the Canadians minus the proportion of Americans. Let's go back to the question that we found out over here, and we calculated those values. The proportion of the Canadian 0.63, the proportion of Americans 0.54. So let's write over here 0.63. We have 0.63 minus 0.54 plus minus the z critical value at the 99% confidence interval is equal to 2.576 multiplied with, and now here we again use our proportions of the samples, which was for the Canadians 0.63 times 1 minus 0.63 relative to 1500 observations, plus the proportion of the Americans was 0.54 times 1 minus 0.54 relative to another 1500 observations over here. Now if we work out the math, we will have a confidence interval equal to 0.09 plus minus 0.046, and that's equal to a confidence interval that has values between 0.044 until 0.136. And if we have a look at the answer key, that happens to be the same confidence interval, so the answer is true. Now before we finish the question, just one last time, let's make sure we understand what this confidence interval is telling us. This confidence interval is telling us that if we take 99% of random samples, so we just take random samples and construct confidence intervals, then the true population mean is gonna be included in 99 of those confidence intervals. Hope this makes sense, and we are done.